It's just gone 3 p.m. Welcome to the special edition of SA Today on this Freedom Day. My colleague PT2 and I will be bringing you part of our show from Constitutional Hill just here in Johannesburg to mark 25 years of democracy, of course. Well, Constitutional Hill is a living museum, you'll know, that tells the story of South Africa's journey to democracy. The site is a former prison and military fort that bears testament to South Africa's turbulent past and today, and is home to the country's constitutional court, which endorses the rights of all South African citizens. Well, this is perhaps no other site of incarceration in South Africa that imprisoned the sheer number of well-renowned men and women as those that were held within the old fort women's jail and number 4 prison. Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, Joe Slovo, Albertina Sisulu, Winnie Madikizela Mandela, Fatima Meer, to mention a few. They all served time at Constitutional Hill. But the precinct also confined tens of thousands of ordinary people, ordinary South Africans, during its 100-year-long history. Men and women of all races, creeds, ages and political agendas, the indigenous, immigrants, of course, ordinary people and the elite. In this way, the history of every South African, young and old, lives here, a deeply symbolic, a deeply significant site on the South African landscape. Now, Constitutional Hill is also a place of vast contrast. It's a place of injustice and justice, oppression and liberation, and this precinct very much a testament to the importance of preserving the sites of atrocities for posterity and for generations going forward, and also recreating them so that they can serve the purposes of the present and to mold future generations. Now, daily tours are on offer at Constitutional Hill. The precinct does conduct regular public events, enabling visitors from every walk of life to engage interactively with this very significant space. There's also a variety of venues available to suit eventing needs, from small private functions to eventing. The art on display at Constitutional Hill, of course, plays an essential role in explaining the function of the highest court of the land to ordinary South Africans. Many of the works here are very powerful metaphors indeed, which make visually concrete the legally high stakes that are being debated in this court itself. It can often seem that the discourse in the chamber is abstract, and it can appear to make the court removed from people, but every effort has been made to make this an intimate space that South Africans can indeed connect with the highest court in the land. The court is a beautiful envelope of art and is a very powerful visit that most South Africans should make at some juncture in their lives. Well, PT2 is standing by at Constitutional Hill, and we'll be crossing over to him at this point. Good day to you, Peter. Great to see you at Constitutional Hill. It's a deeply symbolic and significant site on the South African landscape right now.
Kirshni, thanks very much indeed. Yes, indeed. Constitution Hill, for many people, post-apartheid and post-democracy, will think of this place as the site for the Constitutional Court, where the highest court in the land makes its landmark decisions. But if you start walking around the complex itself, the old fort complex, you start to get a sense of how hard that democracy was fought for, that we're celebrating 25 years on. And this prison complex saw for many decades, in fact, its history goes back as far as the 1890s, but during the apartheid era in particular, you saw political activists being housed here in detention, and people that had broken pass laws and other laws in the country were housed in this part of the city. And it was known sometimes as Robben Island in Johannesburg. And I'm now at the section in the male jail portion where a lot of the male prisoners were housed in solitary confinement. And I want to open this door just behind me to give you a sense of just how small the space that these prisoners had to live in. And if you look inside, this is what you see. And it literally is, I can't think of another word, a small hole, because it's about a meter wide at most and maybe about 3 meters long. And that's where you were in. No windows, nothing except this small vent at the top there. And that was solitary confinement. If you were found, picked up by the police and they took you here, and this is where you spent weeks, sometimes months, detained at this old fort prison complex, particularly those that were in solitary confinement. So the women's jail was built a little bit later on, and that's housed a little bit further north from where we are. We'll be there in a short while, but I want to introduce somebody now who spent 2 times in detention here. If you could come join us, thanks very much indeed for joining us on the program. This is Mam Yvonne Mhlauli, who's now working in the community, researcher by profession, but she spent 2 times here at this prison fort. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's start with Freedom Day. A lot of people, I think, sadly take it for granted, but you lived through an era and fought through an era that makes today very, very important for you.
Thanks, Peter. First and foremost, I'm humbled to come here and do the interview on a day that we remember our first election in South Africa. Yes, so many battles we have fought as people of this country to liberate our country. Others went in exile, others were fighting inside the country. What I've seen, I think there's a lack of appreciation, especially from young people. Maybe it's because they don't know how did we arrive in our democracy. I think what is lacking is education, to educate our future leaders, that is the current generation, and show them what we went through during the apartheid era. Apartheid era was a hell. It was a hell. I don't know how many times they used to arrest me because I was very, very stubborn. Once they arrest me, it was during the night. They arrest me, they said I must produce an ID. I said I'm from Transkei, I don't have ID. They said you must go back home. So
you were staying in Hillbrow at the time?
Yeah, I was in Hillbrow. I've been in Hillbrow. I fought for Hillbrow. There was an organization that was fighting with us here in Hillbrow. We used to call it X-Top. So it was 1989 when the apartheid government agreed that black and white can stay in Hillbrow. Just before the ex-political prisoners in Robben Island were going to be released. So Helen Suzman signed a petition that Hillbrow must be declared as a grey area. In fact, Hillbrow is the first suburb in South Africa to be declared grey area.
All right, we'll talk about the history of Hillbrow and Johannesburg in just a few moments. I want you to take us back to your time here, though. When was the first time you were arrested and brought here? What had you done?
The first time that I was arrested next to Corner Twist and Smith Street for not producing the pass. I was arrested by a white lady who was a very, very cheeky Bure. Her name was Margaret. I can even remember her name. She was Margaret, and she took me straight because I was staying at Fontana Inn then. So that was the first time. And then the following day, we went to Court Westgate. I was remanded for the following month, and then I was sentenced to 3 months for not having a pass.
All right, and you did that 3 months here?
Yeah, I was here for 3 months until they sentenced me.
All right,
and then again, I had a friend who was a communist activist who was staying also in Fontana Inn.
This is a young white man?
Yeah, the young white man, we were holding hands. So the police came and they locked me up and they left the white guy. So when I went to the court, I was charged of Immorality Act, and I didn't understand what is this Immorality Act all about. They said I was not allowed to mingle with white people.
So your crime was holding the hand of a white man?
Yes, the second crime. And then the third one, it was because we were arrested being a group of girls, and they said, what do we want here? We are terrorists. We said we are going to stay in town, even if it's when. So we were stubborn. So until the magistrate said, no, these girls, we need to release them. Let us exempt them to get papers to stay in town. And then 1989, the Hillbrow was declared as a grey area.
And then this has come home for you ever since.
Yeah, my heart is next to Hillbrow.
All right, we'll talk about Hillbrow just now, but tell us what it was like in prison here back then.
This place was a place of humiliation and disgrace. Our dignity have been taken away those years. We were different sections. There were colors, there were blacks, there were whites, but whites were getting the priority. But blacks were like slaves in our own country, as if we are criminals. Because I don't think if you don't have a reference book, you need to be treated the way they were treating us. Even those who were fighting for our liberation, they didn't deserve the treatment that they had here.
All right. So tell us about some of the conditions. We've seen some of the cells that were overcrowded, and the food couldn't have been great.
The food here was different. Black people were eating different food from whites. Even the uniform of the known as the police that were looking after us, their uniforms, it's a pity that were not at the women's jail. Their uniforms were not the same. The white warden, they had their own uniform that was a crimpeline. And then the black wardens, they had their own uniform that was not similar to the white known as. Life here was hell. We used to eat our lunch. We used to eat breakfast early in the mornings, around about 7. And we'll eat lunch at about 11. And supper 4 o'clock. And remember that food, they cook food with bicarbonate of soda. By 7 o'clock, we are hungry again. That's how they were treating us here.
And it must have been cold during the winter months. Blankets were not enough.
It was only one blanket. They put you in a cell. If they find you, maybe you are talking in the line, they charge you. They take you straight to the room like this one, isolation. You'll be there maybe for 10 days, and they will just give you some water. They used to call it rice water. It was some soft porridge, but it's not a porridge. It's something that looks like a porridge, and then you'll eat that for 10 days, unless we are lucky if they release you and they take you back with other prisoners.
And some of your fellow prisoners must have fallen ill during that time.
Yeah, they were. There was a hospital though here, but whether you've got a stomach ache or you've got a headache or what, it was Panado. Everybody was Panado, as long as you're a black person.
Once you were inside these walls, did you have any sense of what was going on outside?
I didn't. I didn't, except when we've got visitors that are visiting us here inside.
All right, so you were jailed several times, and I just wonder, some people might say, once is enough. After that, just lie low, don't, provoke the authorities. That wasn't you.
No, that was not me, because I was fighting for the people to stay in Hillbrow. I'm happy that the Group Areas Act was declared in 1989.
So tell me about Hillbrow, because this is something that you speak about with a lot of emotion. And, I stayed in Berea, and it was a different time, a different Hillbrow back then. It's changed a lot over the years. What are your thoughts about the area, the first area to be declared a grey area, according to you?
Yeah. Hillbrow was declared as a grey area in 1989, endorsed by Helen Suzman. During 1990, that's where we saw a lot of people from Africa coming to Hillbrow. Remember, before it was a diverse community because we have all Greeks, Italians, Germans, we're all staying in Hillbrow, colored and black people. But after 1990, prior to 1994, Hillbrow was overpopulated with people that were coming from Africa. You named them Zimbabweans, Malawans, Congolese, I think the whole Africa is in Hillbrow anyway. And I think Hillbrow, everyone who is outside, whether you are here in South Africa, the first place you want to come to, you want to arrive in Joburg, and you see Hillbrow. That was a popular place then. That's where I ended up staying.
So 25 years later, looking at Hillbrow and 25 years of democracy, your feelings?
My heart is also about Hillbrow because it is not the Hillbrow that we fought for. Hillbrow is a place of, it's a drug den. A young generation are destroyed by drugs. So I don't want to point finger to whatever nationality, but it's a fact that our children and our grandchildren are perishing because of drugs. And another thing that I don't like about Hillbrow is brothel. We've got a lot of brothels in Hillbrow, almost 4 blocks where I'm staying. You find brothels. And in those brothels, there are some laws that does not allow the community to go inside so that we visit the people because they are in our community. We need to integrate them and they must be part of us. But the bosses of those brothels, they don't allow us to go in and see what is taking place inside those brothels.
All right, so if you could sit with the president today, 25 years into democracy, and you were jailed fighting for this democracy, what would you say to President Ramaphosa?
What would I say to the president is to tighten up the security system, because my problem here in this country is the security system, is the justice system. Because I will just make an example of a rape case. You find someone is raped, she will go to the police station and open a case, and then she will go to court, and then at the end of the day, the perpetrator will be also discharged or bailed. And then the safety of the victim is at stake, because no one will come and assist when the perpetrator finds the girl in the street. So my take to the president will be, he must fix up the justice system. You rape, hang pal. You kill, hang pal. Because you can't replace the life that you have killed. That is number one. And also number two is the job creation. Young people are complaining that there are no jobs. But sometimes our children are so spoiled because they don't want to market. They want the government to give them something, when they are relaxing. So that is another thing. Another thing that I'm thinking, okay, it's assisting this thing of a grant. We cannot afford to be a country of handouts. I think that money for grant can be taken to skill development program. I'm not sure. Because our children, they take that grant and do their hair and nails, and you'll find out the money does not go to my grandchild. So I'm against grant.
Mama Yvonne, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for spending some time with us and reliving some of those difficult memories. But I think the stories need to be told so that particularly our young understand what it was like, what you fought for, and why we should mark today as an important day. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Peter, the SABC, and the viewers.
All right, that was Mum Yvonne Mhlauli, who is a community activist now here in Hillbrow. She's a researcher by profession, telling us a little bit about her story, her time at this prison complex back in the 80s, and some of the suffering that she and her fellow prisoners had to endure just to enjoy basic freedoms. I mean, being jailed for holding a man's hand and just walking around without a passport. That was the challenge that millions of South Africans endured for decades under the apartheid system, and why it is important to celebrate Freedom Day today. Well, years after a deceased learner, Michael Komape, fell into a pit toilet at a primary school, his parents still feel a little let down, actually, so many years later by the government. The tragedy happened in a small village outside Polokwane in Limpopo when a dilapidated pit toilet collapsed on the 5-year-old boy. Let's take you back to that story.
The incident caused a public outcry and highlighted the severe lack of safer sanitation facilities in Limpopo's rural schools. This led to a legal battle between the Komape family and the Limpopo Education Department. The family is seeking a 3 million rand compensation. The matter is currently on appeal after the High Court in Polokwane ruled against the family.
Michael Salaya skolong a Singapore. Kami tlarele ka mogae re phela ro potse ena Michael. Kudu ka tjatji le lore o tlhokofetse ka lona.
Michael went to school and never came back. We all miss him very much, especially on the anniversary of his death, January the 20th. The pain of losing him still cuts deep. We have been involved in a legal battle over his death, and we are unhappy about the High Court's decision. That's why we are appealing. My hope for South Africa is that all children will learn in a conducive environment with all the resources they need. Children are the future. They are important.
Michael Komape's parents say they are very unhappy with the treatment they received from government. No official has come to apologize or discuss the issue with them properly. The family mentions that a lot of work in surrounding villages still needs to be done. Komape family still find it hard to accept the tragic incident and find no closure, although it has been years.
There has not been joy in our home since Michael died, because we miss him. It's been years, but there is no closure. We are waiting for a court decision regarding our lawsuit. We just take it day by day. But the manner in which he died makes it hard for us to forget. Michael's dad helped Mahlodimela Primary School to get toilets, but other schools still have poor sanitation facilities.
They say they have, however, received a good support from Section 27 from basic needs to counseling. Kgaolo Napo, SABC News, Polokwane.
So a heartbreaking story there of young Michael Komape telling us about some of the challenges that many kids across the country still sadly face in 2019, 25 years after democracy. To talk to us a little bit more about that, I'm now joined by Dr. Faranaz Veriava, who's Section 24 Head of Education. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
All right, so we're going to talk about the education system, the pit toilets, and so on and so forth. But I just want you to share your own personal thoughts. 25 years into democracy, what does this day mean for you personally, given that you've had a chance to look at it all in its entirety?
Well, there's obviously a lot that goes through your mind on the 27th of April. I was a student in my final year of law school 25 years ago. I was a volunteer at the IEC, and I remember waking up in the morning and being driven by my dad to the IEC offices, and there were helicopters flying overhead, and there was a lot of excitement, and there was a lot of optimism and hope for change. And while there has been a lot of change, mainly the kind of segregation, and the reason why people stayed here and were housed in this jail, that has gone. But many of the challenges around poverty and inequality, and particularly what we are talking about, education, many of those challenges have remained. There have been improvements, even in toilets. There has been development in infrastructure, but there are still many challenges. For example, we know from international outcomes that 78% of learners in grade 4 can't even read. We know that learners have died because of poor infrastructure, particularly toilets. And even though we have something called the norms and standards for school infrastructure that is now in place, there hasn't been sufficient political commitment and will to put those to put what is in the school infrastructure regulations to get that implemented and to have that in place.
All right, so you saying that as much as a lot has been done, more could have been done, and it wasn't done because of politics or for whatever reasons the politicians didn't do what they were supposed to have done. Could we have eradicated pit toilets by now, do you think?
I definitely think we could have eradicated pit toilets by now. I think there should have been, I think, for example, there was a big fight a few years ago between civil society and the Minister of Basic Education to have school infrastructure regulations in place. We had to threaten, or Equal Education had to threaten to take them to court before those regulations were finalized. Those regulations, for example, what they say about toilets, we are standing here in front of toilets, which for us is the most fundamental of dignities. And while it's not the most important issue, it's still an issue that has been deadly. And what the minimum norms say about toilets, they have to be safe, they have to be hygienic, and they have to be private. We see that these were not private. And it also says that pit toilets should have been eradicated. There should have been a lot more money. There should have been a lot more understanding, a lot more effort to do an audit of the number of pit toilets, and there should have been a better plan for pit toilets, and those should have been eradicated ages ago. There have been conditional grants that have been allocated to school infrastructure. That money hasn't been spent fast enough, and for us, there hasn't been an effective audit or a number crunching exercise that could have been done over many years to see what the problems are and how to fix them. And I'm just speaking about toilets, but you could speak about that across the education sector.
All right, so mixed story. Good progress made in some areas, but a lot still to be done. Dr. Faranaz, thanks so much indeed for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, so that's just one of the areas that we'll be looking at over the course of this program, education. We're hoping to start touching on things like economics and equality, and also even looking at solutions, things like racism, also challenges that we've had to overcome and face and continue to fight 25 years after democracy. Let's go back to the studio and we'll have more for you from Constitution Hill a little bit later.